Greetings! In today's video, I want to go through a simple experiment of sorts. I was watching a video from the channel Paint in Hiding, and they were showcasing a trio of Roman Szmal colors that had become a bit hard to re-wet. The title of the video is Issue with Roman Szmal Watercolors, and that intrigued me, so I really wanted to see if I could do the experiment myself. I looked through my collection of Roman Szmal pans, and turns out that I have the same three colors that Paint in Hiding used in their video. I set them aside, I prepared a little test sheet in my sketchbook. I decided to split the page in basically 6 sections, or 3 main sections with 2 subsections each. I make it sound a whole lot more complex than it actually is. What I did is fairly simple. I prepared 2 swatches for each color. One that I will paint from the pan completely dry. No pre-wetting, no preparation, just paint, wet brush, swishing, and then put whatever is on the brush on the paper. The second swatch or stripe or whatever is gonna be painted with the same paint, but after I let it soften a bit. I'm thinking of giving it 5 minutes. I feel like 5 minutes is a reasonable amount of time to let your paint soften. It gives you time to add a bit of water to them when you first get set up, and then while you prepare everything else, the paints will soften and be ready to use when you're ready to use them. Simple. So the 3 colors, we have Goethite, Italian Burnt Sienna, and Caput Mortuum. All 3 of them are earth pigments. Goethite is a pigment brown non-available. It's really just goethite pigment. The Italian Burnt Sienna is pigment brown 7, PBR 7, and the Caput Mortuum is pigment red 102. That's very standard. I feel like there's nothing particularly surprising or unexpected here. The tools I use to make my swatches are very simple. I used a small palm brush to wet the area, and then I use a synthetic bristle brush from Roman Szmal to work the paint. I'm also working from pans, and I've had these for a while and they've been dry for a while, so all in all, I feel like this is a pretty standard average setup. For the pans, I just use a bit of blue tack to stick them on a plastic box, just so it's easier to handle. Also, you'll see me swatch the colors. I really apologize for the weird autofocus issue. I didn't notice while I was filming, but I will go back to these swatches a bit later, so if you want to just listen to me while I paint these swatches, that's fine. I'm really sorry. I'll try to be more careful about that. My first go at Goethite from a completely dry pan with my wet brush was very underwhelming. It didn't pick up a lot of color. It was very light. You can still see that I got a bit of granulation from this first pass, which is nice. But yeah, this color, I would expect it to come on much more strongly. But when used in this way, you don't get that color payoff. You get a very light color. Same process for burnt sienna. I wet the paper, then took the dry pan, wet brush, swished the brush around. And yeah, it didn't pick up a lot of color either. A bit more than the Goethite, but still really nothing good enough. And lastly, and possibly the most underwhelming one, Caput Mortuum. Same idea again. The pan is dry, my brush is wet, and when I try to work the paint in those conditions, I get barely any color. It's beautiful, mind you. I kind of like this very soft, light color, but it's definitely not the full potential of this paint. I set these down, took out my water, added a few drops of water to each pan, and let them sit for 5 minutes. I used the timer. It was exactly 5 minutes. I came back to the sketchbook and the pans and did the same thing again. So I used my palm brush, I wet the swatch, and then you can see right away when I take my brush and dig into the Goethite this time, you can see just how much softer it is. And you can also see that I'm picking up a lot of paint on my brush. So far, this looks very promising. And right as I put the brush on the paper, you immediately get that color payoff, that very beautiful yellowish brown with the granulation within it. It's really easy to use. It's beautiful. I can paint my whole swatch in one go. I don't have to dip my brush again. I don't have to get more paint or more water. Everything goes perfectly well. What about burnt sienna? So I rinse my brush, I take the pan, take the brush, and again, you can see right away just how much softer and easy to handle the paint is. It comes out beautifully as well. You'll see me notice that I forgot to pre-wet this swatch. I'm sorry. But I was still able to paint the whole swatch in one go, and it doesn't look too terrible. So I would say that this paint performed perfectly again. And lastly, now this one did the worst in the initial test. So how will it fare in this second test? Well, it did really good. It was definitely the driest of the threes. So I think if I wanted to use it to its full potential, I would let it sit just a bit longer and perhaps work the paint a bit more to get a stronger pigment. Also, for this one, it did the thing where it had a few tiny chunks of paint in there. When I see that a paint has that going on, what I like to do is I set up a mixing palette on the side, and before putting the brush to the paper, I try to really work the paint to make sure that it's all dissolved, that there's no chunks left, or if there's any chunk, that perhaps they stay on my palette and don't go on my painting. But as you can see, the color came out beautifully again. It's very strong, it's nice, it's granulating, it's kind of what you expect from this color. Once I was done with the 3 earth colors, I got to thinking and I was like, are there any other colors within my collection that I feel would be good candidates for this test? And I came up with a selection of 9 colors that I kind of put into 2 groups. The first group has 3 colors that are kind of a bit more standard colors. I have Manganese Violet PV16, Viridian PG18, and Potter's Pink PR233. I've had experiences in the past with some of these pigments and with them being perhaps a bit more difficult to rewet, so I thought I would try the same kind of rewettability test with these. And then I also have 6 extra colors that I took out that are basically what I like to call rock colors. They are paints that are made from rocks, particularly, or semi-precious minerals, and I have 6 of them. I have lazurite, vivianite, malachite, glauconite, and 2 lapis lazuli. But first, let's start with the 3 more standard colors. So I prepared a similar swatch sheet. I did the same. I had 2 swatch for each color. On the left side is going to be the swatch where I try to paint with a dry pan. On the right is going to be the swatch where I do the painting with paint that has been given time to soften. In this case, with these 3, the results are not as striking as they were with the first 3 colors. The Manganese Violet and the Viridian came out quite well, even at the first try. I was able to get a good color and texture, and that was really nice. Of course, they came out much better when I let the paint soften for a bit, but still, that's a very good sort of reaction time for these paints. The Potter's Pink has a more noticeable difference between the 2 swatches, both in terms of strength and texture. So the first swatch was painted with the dry pan, and the second swatch, the paint had significantly softened, and it made for a much stronger color. I think these 3 performed really well, and then I moved on to the other 6 colors, and I did the same process again. It's just that my swatch sheet is set up a bit differently. I really wanted to have the 6 colors on the same sheet, so I made the swatches a bit smaller, but you can still get a good grasp of the difference between a dry pan and a softened pan. Again, I repeated this process of pre-wetting the swatch area, and on the left side it's the paints when they are completely dry, and on the right side it's the paints after I've put some water in the pans and let them soften for 5 to 10 minutes. And again, a very noticeable difference in this case. These mineral paints, these rock paints, they dry out a bit more than other pigments, but as you can see, given just a bit of time and water, the colors soften really well. The strength came back without any issue, and not all of these are recent paints. I've had these since their release, but they were not released all at the same time, and that didn't have any particular effect on the way they rewet. The strength of some of these is striking. It's really difficult to find some of these pigments made in paint with a significant strength to the color. A lot of them tend to be more muted, more weak. So to have these, like the malachite and the second lapis lazuli, that have this beautiful color and this strong load of color, let's just say that it makes me want to paint even more. So yeah, what basically is my conclusion of this little experiment? Watercolor being what it is, it's a media that is pigment and gum arabic. Gum arabic is the binder. It's the resin that attaches the pigment pigment to your paper, and it's sort of the vehicle for the pigment. And its strength is that it's a water-soluble gum. And since we tend to let watercolor dry, if you want to get the best out of your paints, it makes sense to let the paints soften before using them. So yeah, basically, if you want to paint with your paints, just add a few drops of water in your pans minutes before painting, let it soften a bit, and you're gonna have a much more enjoyable time with the media. And I think that's what makes it extra fun. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope there was something in there that you thought was interesting. Let me know if any of these swatches surprised you. I would love to read your thoughts in the comments. I'll also put a link to Paint in Hiding's video in the description, so make sure to check that out. See ya in the next video. Bye bye!